Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As we've seen, there's plenty of anger and frustration here. It will be the job of the public inquiry announced by the Prime Minister to provide the answers to the questions on everyone's lips. How was the fire able to take hold in just minutes? What about thousands of other high-rise residential buildings around the country? Our science editor David Shukman looks at what more can be done to improve safety in tower blocks.
The London fire has triggered concern right across the country. In Belfast, fire safety leaflets are being handed out by the Housing Authority. Suddenly, there's intense scrutiny of every detail of the arrangements to cope with a fire. And while there are questions about all tower blocks, the key focus is on ones that have been fitted with cladding. All day, there's been pressure from safety experts for every council building to be made safer with sprinklers.
People don't die in sprinkler buildings. A single death in a sprinkler building is a very, very extremely rare event anywhere in the world. A multiple death is almost unheard of.
One of many tragic aspects of this tower block disaster is that for years experts have warned of the dangers of fire. Back in 2013, a coroner called for sprinklers to be fitted to existing council tower blocks. A fire in South London had killed 6 people, but the recommendation wasn't followed, and sprinklers are usually only installed in new buildings. Next, having just one staircase, like in Grenfell Tower, has repeatedly been criticised as a hazard, limiting the chance for people to escape and for firefighters to get in. And there have long been concerns about cladding, the panels fitted outside the buildings. These are usually metal with a layer of insulating material. Back in 1991, the rules about them were tightened, but regulations do not require that the panels should never burn. And some critics say the current system of testing them doesn't go far enough. The cladding at Lakanal House in South London was judged to have intensified the blaze there 8 years ago. An architect who gave evidence at the inquest of the 6 people who died there says promises of action led nowhere, and he fears the same could happen again this time.
What are politicians for? What are these inquiries for? When something like Lakanal House happens, they're all eager to go on television saying lessons will be learned, our thoughts are with the families and so on. But then nothing happens.
It may be that the horror at Grenfell Tower will bring real change, but it'll be a monumental task. And in the meantime, the company that did the refurbishment work, Ryden, says that it met all regulations and now welcomes the public inquiry. David Shukman, BBC News.
As we've been hearing, there had been warnings that this type of thing might happen. Previous fires in tower blocks, mercifully less severe than this one, had led to recommendations for improved safety measures, but few of these have ever been implemented. So who is to blame for this apparent lack of action? Our senior Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has this report.
This was the dream, the designer's glossy images of a tower block fit for the 21st century. 120 flats over 24 floors in a refurbishment programme costing £10 million. This is now the reality. Gutted in what a senior fire officer told me was the country's worst fire since the Second World War. This goes way beyond just the issue of cladding. A public inquiry will have to look at the lines of responsibility, the flaws in regulating the construction industry, the rights of tenants, and the politics of housing poor people. No one knows this better than the local Labour councillor Judith Blakeman, who for years has represented Grenfell's tenants on the Housing Management Board.
We warned and warned and warned again, and no notice was taken of the residents, because they are residents who are dispensable. They are poor people living in a rich area, and the council just wants to regenerate this area and make it richer and richer. We've got to stop this happening to other tower blocks in the country, because every resident of a tower block now is terrified.
What will a public inquiry achieve?
Well, I hope it will achieve not just what went wrong. I hope it will help us to find out why we were consistently ignored. And I hope it will also produce enough recommendations so that regulations are changed, tower blocks are made much safer for people, and those poor people who died will at least have their lives vindicated.
But the politics surrounding Grenfell Tower appear to have run so deep that critics, she claims, were viewed simply as troublemakers.
The leader of my Labour group was asked informally to remove me from the board because I was becoming a nuisance. And because I was raising the Grenfell Tower issues so often, so frequently, it was basically, oh, it's just Councillor Blakeman talking on behalf of her residents. We've already dismissed the residents' concerns. Why is she still banging on about it? We've got better things to do.
Was it said to you that the residents and the tenants should be grateful for all the money that went into renovating it and to stop moaning?
Yes, I was told privately. I think I'd made a speech in the council chamber about the needs of Grenfell Tower residents, and one Conservative councillor came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, we're spending a huge amount of money on those people. We're making those flats wonderful for them. They should be truly grateful and stop moaning.
They didn't, but the council insists residents' concerns had been taken seriously. Yet regulations have barely changed in the past 8 years, ever since Southwark Council were fined £500,000 for a fire in this block which killed 6 residents in 2009. There were calls for a review. The then Housing Minister, Gavin Barwell, now the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, promised a version, but nothing has materialised and probably won't until after the public inquiry is over.
Our intention of this government is to leave absolutely no stone unturned on this, because we completely understand the shock, the concern, the anger, the frustration, the fear.
Fear indeed. Channel 4 News understands a national review may well get underway into the fire safety of all similar types of buildings across the country, while blame in West London will begin to take root.
Well, we did ask to speak to the Policing and Fire Minister, Nick Hurd, and the former Housing Minister, Gavin Barwell, who is now the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, but neither was available. We were also hoping to speak to the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council, Nick Paget-Brown, but he's in a meeting with the local tenant management organisation. We're joined now by Andy Slaughter, who is the Shadow Housing Minister and happens to be Labour MP for nearby Hammersmith, whose border is literally, I think, about 200 yards over there, and Ronnie King, the Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Fire and Safety Rescue Group. Let's start first of all with you. Andy Slaughter, there is real anger here against both political parties, very strongly against both. You've both been deeply negligent down the years as to what has really had to be done with these buildings.
I think there is, as well as sorrow and a sense of solidarity, there is a real anger and a growing anger here, principally around the fact that people believe this was a preventable tragedy, yes, and that they had been warning of it for a period of time. And what people are asking for is quick action, but transparent action, and something which gives justice and accountability here. And
transparent admission of past sins, some of which are on Labour's deck.
Well, in relation to the problem here, John, is that we do not know absolutely. There's lots of rumours flying around.
What we do know is that in 2005 you loosened the fire regulations. You no longer had the fire services deeply involved in assessing each of these buildings as they went up. Some of them were, some of them weren't.
And local authorities played a bigger role. Now, both the fire service and the local authorities have had some of the biggest cuts in their budgets over the past 7 years in particularly, but of course there still is a duty. There still is a duty in terms of risk assessments and in terms of...
There may be a duty. I want to hear an expression of sorrow for your party's involvement in bringing about a situation in which there was loose regulation of fire protection.
It's more than sorrow. There's deep trauma in this community. I mean,
I'm asking about the Labour Party and its responsibility. Well, are you going to say, we regret that we did not enforce the fullest possible regulation of these buildings?
I'm happy to say that that it should not be part of political, and everybody should take their share of responsibility. But what we need to do, we do need this public inquiry because it's very complicated matters. But we need some quicker action than that.
Okay, let's look then at what can be done immediately.
Yeah.
And the first thing, it seems, is that we need to ensure that the remaining blocks like these do have sprinklers and do have central fire alarms. That is something which could be passed in emergency legislation tonight.
I think that the number one priority, because there are hundreds of thousands of people living in high-rise blocks, not just in this area of London, across the country, is that we have to know, we have to be able to give an assurance to every single one of those people that they are safe in their own homes.
Right.
That's the first priority of government now.
Well, now, Ronnie King, I want to bring you in because you're advisor to the All-Party Fire and Safety Committee.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you view the loosening, frankly, what looks like the loosening of structures to ensure that buildings like this were properly fire protective.
Well, in 1986, the Section 20 of the London Building Act was repealed and replaced by the National Building Regulations. The outside walls of these flats would have had 1 hour fire resistance under the old Section 20 of the London Building Acts. When the National Building Regulations replaced them, and the coroner pointed this out, that all that was required of the outside walls was to have a Class O surface spread of flame, which is considerably less.
But what you're telling us is there was a loosening of the regulation, effectively.
Well, not. I don't think it was knowingly. It was actually, that's what the rest of the country did.
Why have successive governments allowed a situation which the people who know most about fighting fires and preventing them, the fire service, why have they been cut out of the action?
Yes. Well, I'm a former chief fire officer, 40 years as a fireman and 20 years as a chief fire officer, and I've seen this, and obviously it's not a normal occurrence. It is a very unusual, exceptional occurrence, and we have to get to the bottom of what has happened differently here, because fires are going down, fire deaths are going down.
But you'll accept that in the public inquiry, this has to be a cardinal element, and responsibility has to be identified, and of course all the rest of it. But I'm afraid there we're going to have to leave it. I'm very grateful to you both for coming. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Now, one of the key questions for the public inquiry will be whether the recent refurbishment of Grenfell Tower was a factor in what happened here. Questions have been raised about the material used in the cladding that was added to the concrete walls of the block to help insulation, and about the company that supplied it. Ed Hauker has this special report.
When the inquiry into this horrific fire gets underway, it will be drawn towards clues scorched onto the facade of Grenfell Tower. Metal sheeting seemingly burned away, insulation turned to ash. Cladding materials from recent renovation, supposed to be fireproof and immediately suspected by expert eyewitnesses like Tony Bird as a key factor in the blaze.
There is great uncertainty about the effectiveness of cladding on buildings that you refurbish, particularly high cost there. And I'll show you here, I mean, this is a bit of cladding from the building, okay, which is...
On the outside of the cladding system is a waterproof metal sheet. We now know the type used contained a potentially flammable plastic core rather than a fireproof mineral. But beneath that is a thick layer of insulation. Despite its appearance after the fire, its manufacturer states that it surpasses high-rise fire safety tests. But only a full investigation will establish which, if any of these components, played a part in helping Grenfell burn. This is the standard fire test for high-rise insulation. Fire should not spread from its start in a 3-story section of the building within 15 minutes. But at Grenfell Tower, it clearly did. If fire safety standards were met, a darker prospect then is presented, that the laws that govern building fire safety are inadequate. Jim Glocklin of the Fire Protection Association says regulation may not be keeping up.
Certainly the external envelope of the building is probably weakly handled in our current building regulations. But I think we are seeing that a need for the building regulations to respond to new building methods and new refurbishment methods. Really, the last time they were reviewed was 10 years ago, and really 10 years ago we didn't have construction or refurbishment methods of this type deploying large quantities of combustible material.
A few miles from the Grenfell Tower is the Chalcott's estate, where the same contractors and subcontractors happen to renovate 5 tower blocks. And across England, the business of cladding high-rise buildings is booming. But that means more residents in renewed tower blocks, and they are worried. Are you concerned following the Grenfell Tower?
Yes, I am. Very much. They refurbish everything, but it's left for everybody to see what is going on. You know, I mean, we're scared sometimes if there is a fire. There's no sprinklers. What are we going to do?
It's just a bit scary at the moment, and whenever you see the video, you feel like what's going to happen next, and we don't know, to be honest.
Camden Council say that all their housing blocks receive fire risk assessments and additional checks will now be made. Did the cladding added to Grenfell Tower contribute to the blaze? The images are chilling, but only a full investigation will establish what the true role of materials or regulations around them played in this disaster.
Ed Hauker reporting.
Well, there are around 4,000 blocks of flats in the UK that are of a similar age to Grenfell Tower and subject to the same building regulations. Therefore, they don't need to have sprinklers fitted. If they were built today, they would. Even more concerning, perhaps, for people who live in them, some have had the same kind of cladding fitted as Grenfell Tower.
A 1960s high-rise block refurbished with a new face fit for the 21st century. Camden's gleaming Chalcott's estate and the ill-fated Grenfell Tower have similarities. They both use the same 2 contractors, Ryden and Harley Facades, to clad the building. It's an uncomfortable connection for many who live here.
Have you been asking yourself more questions?
Yeah, a lot more questions. A lot more questions. What we do in the same situation, what exactly our building is made of, how flammable it is, etc. All the sorts of questions that weren't in our minds before yesterday are definitely arising now.
There are no fire alarms in this building. There's no means of knowing that there's a fire. So, yes, I'm deeply concerned.
Do we have the same type of cladding? If so, has the advice changed? Should we get out rather than staying in?
There's no sprinkler system and only a single staircase for escape. The list of concerns and mixed messages is a long one.
Sound the alarm.
So there's no alarm.
There is no
unless you
alarm.
go banging on people's doors.
Okay. And you said it using the appliances provided?
We haven't got any fire. Do you see any appliances around here? No.
Nothing.
We have dry risers that the fire brigade use, but we have no access to them. We have no access to fire hoses.
Grenfell Tower is 3 miles away, but its shadow feels a lot closer. These are nervous times for people living in high-rise buildings. After the Grenfell fire, it's fair to say that many thousands of people, not just here in London, but across the country, are very worried about their homes. Tonight, Camden Council have told us they'll inspect the cladding and do safety checks on high-rise blocks. Reassurance is required, but as residents look out over London, there is a vivid and unnerving symbol of the worst-case scenario. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, North London.
Among the many groups who will give evidence to the public inquiry when it starts will be Britain's fire safety professionals, of course. At a conference today, some have called for changes to safety rules and what the public is told about them.
For half a century, Britain's building boom has been largely vertical. But yesterday's tragedy has left high-rise residents with urgent, unanswered questions. Today, these fire safety experts met in Manchester, their first chance to discuss the lethal devastation at Grenfell Tower.
What is clear, and what we do definitely know, is the rate of fire spread was extraordinary. Absolutely a real eye-opener for the fire services in this case.
They focused on Grenfell Tower's exterior, known as cladding, and many here want changes to the rules.
At the scene, there was real alarm about what happened with the cladding.
it just seemed to ignite.
We've been recreating some of these events in the laboratory and shown exactly what can happen. In this particular case, through a simple fire source of a wheelie bin against a wall, we get total involvement of a cladding system horribly quickly, and certainly can show a scope for very rapid and comprehensive fire spread.
The precise content of the Grenfell Tower cladding still isn't known. It was not used in this experiment.
The people involved with the cladding and insulation at Grenfell Tower say they complied with all the regulations. Do we need to look again at those standards?
We need to not only look at the standards, we need to look at the approvals process for the materials. Really, to make a building resilient to fire, the first rule is not to use combustible products in it.
Many blocks like Grenfell Tower advise residents to stay put in their flats if there's a fire elsewhere in the building. Some experts want changes in how that policy is communicated.
Yes, I brought you here today to look at this.
For 17 years, Darren Baird was a frontline firefighter. At this stripped-back block in Manchester, he explained the principle of the stay-put policy.
You can quite clearly see that compartmentation between floor and floor, the principle being that a fire shouldn't be able to spread to the adjacent flat. The problem is that an occupant should evacuate if they feel threatened by fire or smoke within their particular flat. It doesn't mean that you stay put until the building is no more. And this is an unprecedented incident. Fire is normally contained to the flat of origin in my experience.
70s blocks like Grenfell Tower weren't required to fit sprinklers. Though rules have now changed, we still don't make these older buildings comply. Fire investigators recreated a front room for us to demonstrate how a sprinkler works.
You can see the hot gases rising and the smoke. Stop the fire from spreading. Sometimes they even extinguish the fire. But what they're primarily intended to do is hold the fire in check, stop the growth, allow more time for evacuation. I think it's reasonable to say that had there been sprinklers in Grenfell Tower and had the fire originated in the flat, they may have prevented the fire from spreading.
Thousands live and work in buildings that shape our high-rise landscape. Now they want answers and to know that positive change can come from yesterday's appalling loss. Chris Troy, News at 10, Manchester.
Well, when work begins on the public inquiry, one area of investigation will be whether the year-long refurbishment of Grenfell Tower was properly managed. Our business editor, Joel Hills, is here. Joel, you've been looking at uncovered indeed some interesting documents.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, Ryden, we know, was the contractor that ended up winning the project and finished it last summer. But when the project was conceived, Ryden wasn't the intended contractor. A council document dated from July 2013 makes clear that actually the proposed contractor was a company called Leadbitter. Right up to the point, Tom, that Leadbitter quoted £11.2 million for the work, which was well above the council's budget. So the whole project went back out to tender, and Ryden ended up agreeing to do it for £2.5 million less. Now, it's interesting because looking through this, the scope of works looks almost the same: replacement windows, exterior cladding to the building, a completely new heating system, the boxing club, the nursery. And the inquiry, I think, will want reassurance that corners weren't cut here in the driving down of costs. Now, all the work that was carried out, Ryden says we know it subcontracted the cladding. The cladding's of particular interest. That was subcontracted to a company called Harley Facades. Harley says it didn't manufacture the cladding, it just installed it. And Ryden tonight saying all the work it carried out met building and fire regulations and was signed off by the council.
OK, but we just heard Chris there going in some depth into what different sprinklers could make. So they refurbished this building. Why didn't they put sprinklers in?
It's a really good question. And my understanding is that it wasn't actually even discussed, which makes it particularly baffling because in 2013, very clear advice was given by the government to every local authority that they should consider retrofitting tower blocks of that age with sprinkler systems in light of a terrible fire in 2009 and a coroner's verdict. Now, it was a recommendation. It was not a legal requirement. But before we condemn Kensington and Chelsea and the council for their behaviour, bear in mind that according to the British Automatic Fire Sprinkler Association, after 2013, only 100 tower blocks across Britain were upgraded in that way. The vast majority of the 4,000 others were not. Most local authorities seem to take the view this was an expense they could not afford.
OK, Joe, thank you very much indeed. Now, there has already, as we've reported, been much focus on the cladding at Grenfell Tower and whether it contributed to the speed at which the fire spread. But one expert we've spoken to today suggests it may not have been the only factor. Another could be the damage to the fabric of the exterior walls during the block's refurbishment.
Whoa, look.
The speed of this fire's spread has surprised the experts. This footage, shot by a bystander, caught the early stages of the fire. In only 5 minutes, the flames had already moved up several floors. Scientists will want to know how the fire moved through the building to cause such devastation.
Every now and again, such as here, you'll see there's a big flaring of the flames. Now, that suggests to me that all of a sudden there's some sort of flammable gases coming out or appearing from perhaps behind the orifice, from behind the cladding, or from perhaps inside a room.
One focus of inquiry by fire experts such as Claire Benson will be any building works carried out inside the tower. Changes to the fabric of the structure could explain how the fire moved from inside to outside.
What might happen is you might take out walls that were regarded as firewalls before without realising, although that would be very rare. More likely is that you would perhaps make a hole for a duct or for some cables, and that hole is meant to be filled with fireproof material, but if that didn't happen, that might enable hot gases, fire to get through.
The tower's design should have kept any fire within a single flat, what's known as compartmentalisation. That should have contained the fire for about half an hour, giving firefighters time to deal with it at the source. Investigators will focus on why this didn't happen. Initial suspicion for the fire's spread fell on the external cladding, which had recently been added to the outside of the building. How that cladding behaved in the intense heat will be part of the inquiry, but it's unlikely to be the only explanation. Perhaps there were voids, gaps or breaches between flats, allowing heat to rise up and through the building quickly. Cladding has been a factor in fires in Australia and France. Lessons from those incidents could help investigators in London, who'll have to search through what's left of Grenfell Tower.
There's a lot of evidence in the ashes. There's a lot of metal components that may have survived or give an indication of abnormal electrical activity, which may be a cause of the fire. They will be closely examined or x-rayed or looked under a microscope.
Right now there are many more questions than answers. The investigation will be painstaking, but it's already beginning. Alok Jha, News at 10.
Well, the public inquiry will take evidence for all manner of experts, contractors, councillors, emergency services, community organisations, politicians and hopefully residents. But it doesn't take a public inquiry to say that a review of building regulations covering fire safety was promised by Theresa May's Chief of Staff last year, but has not been published. The reason for that review was, as we were talking about, the fatal Lakanal housing fire in 2009, a multi-storey block in which 6 people died. The coroner in the Lakanal house inquest said that the government should encourage providers of high-rise housing to consider retrofitting sprinkler systems. There was none in Grenfell, and there are 4,000 tower blocks in the UK that don't have sprinklers. Well, we'll be talking to the lawyer for the Lakanal residents in a second, but first, last night, our policy editor Chris Cook reported on details of the material with which Grenfell was cladded. He's been looking more closely at the issue. Here's his report.
One of the most important questions to answer quickly is how many other buildings are at risk from fires of the sort that devastated the Grenfell Tower? Right now, that's a very hard question to answer.
To really understand the tragedy that unfolded this week in Kensington, it may help to appreciate a success story from Camden. Back in 2012, there was a major fire on the 17th floor of the building behind me. Our pensioners' flat was completely destroyed. But the fire didn't spread. It was contained by the walls and floors and the external features of the building. So the fire brigade were able to get here and stop it from getting into any other flats. A personal tragedy was prevented from becoming a much bigger disaster.
One explanation for why the fire spread so quickly in the Grenfell Tower was that the fire appears to have spread over the outside of the building via the cladding. That's insulation added to the exterior of the building during a refurbishment in 2015. This broad design of cladding is in wide use. You pin a layer of insulative material to the outside of the building, then leave a small gap, then add a waterproof layer to guard against the weather. It was this outer layer that Newsnight revealed yesterday was of a design that wasn't as fireproof as it might have been. But experts have also called into question whether there's a bigger national problem, not with Grenfell Tower in particular, but with materials being used in general in cladding. The Fire Protection Association has been conducting tests on widely used insulation material, for example.
So typically we will fill a wheelie bin with cardboard, plastic bottles, the sort of normal stuff you see in a normal recycling bin. We put it up against the cladding, we set fire to it. You get some initial charring, but within a very short space of time, the fire has got into the expanded polystyrene and shot up.
Theresa May today announced an inquiry. Whether we take enough care to keep such combustible material safely boxed in is one of the questions it will need to answer.
I am today ordering a full public inquiry into this disaster. We need to know what happened. We need to have an explanation of this. We owe that to the families, to the people who have lost loved ones, friends, and the homes in which they lived.
One of the first questions, though, is how widespread is the sort of arrangement we saw at the Grenfell Tower across the country?
Where we've seen the widespread insulation of buildings, retrospective insulation of buildings, is generally in social housing. And the insulation materials of choice tend to be combustible or of limited combustibility. It's very rare that I'm seeing installed in residential accommodation non-combustible insulation material.
We may have problems because we're quite slow to update our building regulations.
I'm absolutely amazed that your regulations haven't been looked at for over 10 years, as I understand it. With all of the developments that are happening with materials, we see some of these fires that are occurring around the world. We have lessons that we learn from other countries, new materials that are being developed, research that's carried out. A 10-year plus review of regulations, I don't think is acceptable.
But there's been resistance in Whitehall to regulation reform, and in part it's because officials didn't see the danger.
Conversations that we've had with officials at DCLG very, very recently have pointed out that people aren't dying in these buildings.
And so, while no one was dying, it didn't matter.
It becomes less of a priority. Group upon group have been lining up to tell government they need to make a review of building regulations.
A full explanation of the tragedy will certainly go well beyond cladding. The fire penetrated the building very deeply, so why didn't its internal fire breaks hold the fire back? Was gas a factor? Do we need sprinklers in more buildings? We certainly need a full inquiry.
Chris Cook. Well, Sophie Khan acted as lawyer for the residents group of the Lacanal house fire in 2009, in which 6 people died. She's here in the studio. Good evening, Sophie Khan. When you saw that fire last night, it must have brought back awful memories.
It did, and questions have to be asked as to how, after a very detailed inquest and narrative verdicts and a Rule 43 report to the government, why this could happen again.
Is the right way a public inquiry?
That's not the right way. The right way is inquests. The families have a right to participate, they have a right to cross-examine, they have the right to put questions to all the experts. They are even able to get their own experts if the coroner gives permission. The coroner is independent of the government. In a public inquiry, it is very much government-led.
And I'm right in saying there's absolutely no way that any resident, any family member can take part and ask questions in a public inquiry?
Not in a public inquiry. There's a very limited rules in public inquiries. It is very much government-led, government-controlled, government outcome.
Do you think this was avoidable?
This was avoidable, 100%, because the sprinklers, even though it wouldn't have saved the building, I think it would have saved the individuals inside the building. It would have given them time to get out. The building, I believe, would have perished, but the individuals wouldn't have perished. And this is not just after the Lacanal house. There is studies here.
Is it your experience that by and large residents and residents association are not listened to?
They're not listened to, but also the fire assessments We have to look at the fire assessments, because here there is a fire issue as well. It's not just a council we need to look at. What were the fire brigade doing? The refurbishments have been done. What tests did they do on the building?
But these are questions, as you say, that the residents will not be able to ask anyone in the public inquiry. In your view, is this a kind of unintended consequence of the public inquiry, or do you think it's an absolutely worked out position that if the government goes for a public inquiry and not an inquest, they will be not subject to the same scrutiny?
Yes, that is correct. Because in an inquest, they lose control of what a jury verdict will do. And the juries will come out with narrative verdicts which may be very difficult for the government to
But you can
hear.
only have one or another, you can't have both.
You can't have both, you can only have one or the
So
other.
what would you be urging residents to do right now, to kick up a fuss, to change?
Yes. They should really be demanding an inquest from the government to say this is not the right way, we don't want a public inquiry, we want an inquest. And I'm very concerned as to why Mrs May came out so quickly to say public inquiry. What is there that she knows that needs to be hidden?
Sophie Kahn, thank you very much indeed.